I had been living with Daniel for about 6 months. At first, everything seemed normal. We weren't best friends, but we got along fine. Both of us had our routines, and the living arrangement was pretty smooth. That was until I started noticing little things around the apartment that felt off. It began small, really small. I'd come home from work, and things in my room would be slightly out of place. I'm not a particularly neat person, so at first, I figured I must have just forgotten where I left stuff. But after a while, it was hard to ignore. My clothes would be folded differently than how I'd left them. My phone charger would be on the opposite side of the room, and even my toothbrush looked like it had been moved. I asked Daniel if he had been in my room. He laughed it off, acting like I was crazy for even suggesting it. "Why would I go into your room?" he said, with that smile he always wore. I brushed it off, trying not to sound paranoid, but inside, I was starting to feel uncomfortable. Then things got weirder. One day, I came home and found my laptop open on my bed. I never left it like that. I always kept it closed when I wasn't using it. Curious, I opened it up, and to my surprise, the camera app was open. There were hours and hours of footage recorded, footage of my empty room, of me sleeping, and even of me coming home and leaving. My skin prickled. Someone had been recording me. I confronted Daniel that night. I was angry, but I tried to stay calm. "Daniel, have you been messing with my stuff?" My laptop has footage of my room recorded on it. He looked at me, completely unfazed. "Dude, I have no idea what you're talking about. Why would I record you?" He laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. His calmness made me uneasy, like I was the one who was being irrational. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to believe him. Maybe it was a glitch with the laptop, or maybe I'd forgotten to close the camera app. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The way he denied everything so casually, like he wasn't even worried, just made my paranoia worse. The tension between us grew. I started locking my door at night, but that didn't make me feel any better. I couldn't shake the feeling that Daniel was watching me. So, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I bought a small, hidden camera and placed it in my room, aimed directly at my bed. I didn't tell anyone. Not even my closest friends knew. I just needed to see what was happening when I wasn't there. A few days went by, and nothing out of the ordinary happened. I started to think I might have overreacted. Maybe Daniel really hadn't been in my room. But then I checked the camera footage. What I saw made my stomach turn. The footage showed Daniel entering my room at night. He didn't just sneak in, though. He would stand there, right by my bed, watching me. For hours. I could see him whispering things, but I couldn't hear what he was saying. He never touched anything. He just stood there, watching me sleep. I felt sick. My hands were shaking as I watched the footage. What kind of person does that? And why? I immediately called the police. I didn't feel safe in my own home anymore. I didn't know what Daniel was capable of, and I wasn't about to wait around to find out. When the police arrived, Daniel was gone. He had left the apartment sometime that morning, taking nothing with him except a backpack. They searched for him, but it was like he had vanished into thin air. 2 weeks passed, and I tried to move on with my life. I had changed the locks and gotten a new roommate. Things were starting to feel normal again, though I still had trouble sleeping. I kept waking up, expecting to see Daniel standing over me. Then I received an email from an unknown address. My heart raced as I opened it. The email had no subject, no message, just a video attachment. I hesitated, but curiosity got the better of me. I clicked play. The video showed Daniel. He was in some dark, unfamiliar room, sitting on the floor. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow, but he was smiling. He stared into the camera for what felt like an eternity before he finally spoke. "I'll be back." That was it. The video ended, leaving me staring at my screen in shock. I reported it to the police, but they couldn't trace the email or the video's origin. I haven't heard from Daniel since, but I still check over my shoulder everywhere I go. I had been living with Jake in our small Chicago apartment for almost a year when things started to get strange. Jake was quiet and kept to himself most of the time, but he wasn't a bad roommate. We both worked odd hours, so we rarely crossed paths, and when we did, we'd exchange a quick nod or a few words before retreating to our rooms. I never thought much of it until that evening when I stumbled upon something disturbing. It all started when I decided to clean out the shared closet in the hallway. We had accumulated a bunch of junk in there: old boxes, clothes we never wore, random kitchen gadgets. I figured it was time to declutter. As I was pulling boxes off the shelves, I noticed something strange behind them. It was a small old door, barely noticeable, hidden behind a pile of boxes that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. The door was weird. It didn't look like it was part of the apartment's original design. It was wooden, with rusted hinges and no handle. I almost ignored it, thinking it led to nowhere, but curiosity got the better of me. I pried it open with a screwdriver, expecting to find nothing but old pipes or wiring. Instead, I found a narrow, dark passageway. My heart started to race. The passage was barely wide enough to crawl through, but I squeezed inside, using my phone's flashlight to guide me. The passage led to a small, hidden room. The space was cramped, dusty, and smelled like mold. But what really made my stomach churn was what was inside. There were photos, dozens of them, tacked to the walls. They were old, faded, and looked like they had been taken without the subjects knowing. Some of the faces I recognized, neighbors from our building, people I'd seen on the street. But there were others, people I didn't know, staring blankly into the camera. That wasn't all. Scattered around the room were old newspapers with headlines about disappearances and murders, some of them dating back years. In one corner, there was a small metal box filled with what looked like hair and fingernails. I felt sick. My mind raced, trying to piece together what I was seeing, but nothing made sense. Why would Jake have a room like this? Why was he collecting these things? I couldn't ignore it. I had to confront him. That night, when Jake got home from work, I cornered him in the kitchen. "Jake, what the hell is going on?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "What's with the room?" He looked at me, his expression calm, almost bored. "Oh, that," he said casually. "I've been collecting those things for years. Collecting." I repeated, my voice rising. "You've been keeping photos of people, hair, nails. What the hell is wrong with you?" Jake shrugged. "They're people I need to watch," he said simply, as if that explained everything. I was stunned. My heart pounded in my chest. People you need to watch? What does that even mean? His face changed then. His eyes narrowed, and he took a step toward me. "You wouldn't understand," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "It's not something you need to worry about." Fear washed over me. I realized in that moment that I didn't know Jake at all. I had been living with him for nearly a year, sharing space, making small talk, but I had no idea who he really was or what he was capable of. I decided right then and there that I needed to get out of that apartment as fast as possible. I moved out the next day. I didn't tell Jake. I just packed my things and left while he was at work. I couldn't be there any longer, not after what I had seen, not after the way he had looked at me. I didn't care if I lost the security deposit or had to crash on a friend's couch for a while. I just needed to get away. A week later, I saw a news report about a woman from our building who had gone missing. She was one of the faces in the photos I had seen in that hidden room. My stomach dropped. I called the police, told them everything I had found, but by the time they searched the apartment, Jake was gone. He had vanished, just like the woman in the photo. The secret room was still there, though. The photos, the newspapers, the box of hair and nails, It was all there, waiting to be discovered. I couldn't shake the feeling that Jake was still out there somewhere. Watching, waiting, and collecting. And I couldn't help but wonder who was next. That room haunts me to this day. I don't know what Jake was planning, and I don't want to know. All I know is that I was lucky to get out when I did, but I still check the news every now and then, hoping that someday they'll find him before he finds someone else. My name is Jordan, and I used to live in a small apartment in Portland with a roommate named Sarah. She was the kind of person who kept to herself, quiet, and introverted. We weren't close, but we got along well enough to share the space without any issues. She worked late shifts at a diner, so it wasn't unusual for her to come home after midnight, or sometimes not at all if she decided to crash at a friend's place. One evening, she didn't come home. I didn't think much of it at first. Like I said, it wasn't unusual. But then 3 days passed, and there was still no sign of her. No texts, no calls, nothing. I started to get worried and decided to contact the police. They took my statement, but without any leads, there wasn't much they could do. They assured me they'd look into it, but as the days turned into weeks, the investigation seemed to go cold. Sarah had simply vanished. I tried to carry on with my life, but the emptiness of the apartment started to get to me. It wasn't just the silence that bothered me. It was something else, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Strange things began happening around the apartment. At first, it was small stuff. Things would be moved, or I'd noticed that food I hadn't touched was missing from the fridge. I brushed it off as me being forgetful, but the feeling of unease kept growing. Then, I started hearing noises at night. Faint footsteps, the creak of the floorboards, like someone was moving around the apartment. But every time I got up to check, there was nothing. Just the empty rooms, staring back at me in the darkness. My mind raced with possibilities. Was Sarah back? Was someone else in the apartment? I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. One evening, I decided to clean out Sarah's room. It had been weeks since she'd disappeared, and I thought maybe going through her things might give me some clue about what had happened to her. As I was moving her bed, I noticed one of the floorboards was loose. My heart skipped a beat as I pried it open, revealing a small space beneath the floor. Inside, I found Sarah's phone, some personal belongings, and a journal. The journal was filled with page after page of disturbing entries. Sarah had been documenting her growing paranoia, convinced that someone was watching her every move. She wrote about feeling eyes on her when she was alone, hearing whispers that no one else could hear, and sensing a presence in the apartment. As I flipped through the pages, her handwriting became more frantic, more desperate. The final entry was the most chilling. It simply read, "I know they're inside the apartment. I have to leave before it's too late." I felt a cold sweat break out across my skin as I realized what this meant. Sarah hadn't just left. She had been terrified, convinced that someone was after her. And whoever it was, they had been in the apartment with us. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every sound, every creak of the building settling, sent my heart racing. I kept thinking about those footsteps I'd heard, the things that had been moved, the food that had gone missing. Had someone really been in the apartment with me all this time? The next morning, I packed up my things and moved out. I didn't care where I went. I just needed to get away from that place. I called the police and told them what I'd found, but it didn't seem to help. Sarah was never found, and the investigation went nowhere. But I knew what I had felt, what I had heard. Even now, I can't shake the feeling that whoever was watching Sarah might still be out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting. Every time I hear a creak in the night or see something out of place, I'm reminded of those final words in her journal. I have to leave before it's too late. And I wonder if maybe, just maybe, she was right.